Hello, all you beautiful people who have tuned in for the next instalment of The Devil's Engine, Hell Fighters. We are only about 6 chapters away from the end of the book. I'll probably do 3 today and 3 next time, but I'll see how... Yeah, it's probably a bit too much to do for one go, but we'll race through it and see how far we get. Pan and Marlowe and the others have just found Meridiana's lair, and which is through a mirror shop. And all these mirrors are covered up, but there's something on the other side of the mirrors, something very scary. And Herc has just been dragged inside a mirror by what looks like a demon. Not a demon that's pulled itself out of bricks and rocks and everything, but a demon that's pulled itself out... a demon that's just a demon, the way they look in hell, all fleshy and gross. So Herc's just been pulled in a mirror, and here we are. This is called Last Stand. We are somewhere in Venice at the moment, I think. Okay. Herc! Marlowe ran, colliding with Pan. Somehow he managed to keep his feet, both of them skidding to a halt next to the shattered mirror. There was no glass left in that twisted frame, but the view was identical. The same room, the same shrouded mirrors. Herc was nowhere to be seen, but Marlowe could hear the old guy screaming, the crunch of something toppling, the muffled growl of a demon. Herc! Pan screamed. She pressed her head through the gap, and Marlowe grabbed her shoulder. She turned, shoving him away. Don't you dare, she said. The frame was shaking, something pushing its way out of the inner edge. The face, mounted on the top, opened its mouth, its jaw twisting in agony, those dead eyes rolling in their punctured sockets. Glass was growing inwards from the frame, the sound of it setting Marlowe's teeth on edge. It was repairing itself. We've got to move now, Pan said, and she didn't wait for a reply before throwing herself through the shrinking gap. Here we go again, Marlowe said. He took a hit on his inhaler, coughing the dust and fear from his lungs. Then he stepped after her. It was like walking into a freezer, so cold it burned. He chased a cloud of his breath into the room beyond, wrapping his hands around his torso. Pan was to his left, running towards a thrashing pile of limbs that could only be Herc and the demon. The creature had Herc in its jaws, still, shaking him like a dog with a rabbit. The old guy's desert eagle was halfway across the room. Marlowe stopped, frozen by fear. What the hell was he supposed to do against a demon? Demons. There were howls coming from outside the room, like a pack of wolves was out there. Behind him, the mirror was sealing itself up fast. Charlie threw himself in. Then the French girl, Claire, stumbled through. Then Truck was there, trying to squeeze his bulk through the jagged edge. He was too big, the glass tearing through his clothes, blood running thick. No! He yelled. The glass looked like it was growing through him. If he didn't move one way or the other, he was going to be cut clean in half. We'll open it again, Marlowe said. Get back! We'll find another way through. Truck was still pushing, and Marlowe ran at him, shouldering him out of the gap. Truck staggered back like a wounded bear, clutching the wounds in his flank. We'll find another way, said Marlowe. I could have gotten through, Truck said, pounding on the glass, on the frame. Damn it, Marlowe! Jamie was there too, pulling something from her pocket. It glinted in the light when she threw it through the baseball-sized gap, and it clattered on the floor. A dagger, the one that she'd conjured demons with. She opened her mouth, yelling something, but the last of the glass had grown over the open wound. It sealed like an airlock door, the pressure making Marlowe's ears hurt. Jamie's words were completely silent, Truck's fists not making the slightest sound as he pounded on the glass. Both of them were slowing down, their movements creeping almost to a halt, as if Marlowe was watching a slow-motion replay. No time to think about it. He turned to see Herc on the floor, the demon still tearing into him. Pam was throwing punches at it, Charlie running for the gun. Marlowe scooped up the dagger and ran across the room. He studied it as he went, the iron blade etched with symbols. It was heavier than it had any right to be. There was no doubt it was something from deep inside the engine. It gave off that same bone-numbing hum. Get off! Herc roared, punching the demon in the side of its head. It didn't even seem to feel it, those jaws snapping shut around his torso again. Gunshots, Charlie holding the Desert Eagle and popping off rounds. 2 missed, thudding into the walls. The third glanced off the demon's shoulder. The beast reared up, roaring, and Charlie shot it again. The round punched into its chest, knocking it back. Pan had her hands under Herc's armpits, hauling him across the floor. The old guy was clutching his ribs, his face bloodless and etched with pain. The demon shrieked again. Every inch of it glistened like it had no skin, only thick cords of muscle. Its eyeless face sniffed at the air, that raw red throat ready to swallow them all whole. Charlie fired again, a bullet ripping off a chunk of the demon's cheek. The demon charged at him like a tiger, jaws churning at the air. With a crunch of its powerful legs, it was airborne, Charlie swearing as he dived to the side. The demon missed him, its claws gouging canyons in the wooden floor as it turned. It charged again, Charlie rolling in a panic, too slow to get up. Marlowe put his head down and ran, the blade glinting in his fist. The demon sensed him coming, blasting out a cry that stank of charcoal. Then it was on the move, bouldering towards him. What the hell are you doing, Marlowe? He thought. He skidded to a halt and tried to turn around. The demon thumped into him like a car, knocking him across the room. He rolled onto his back. Everything hurt. Help! He croaked, but the only thing to answer was the demon as it pounced. It was like looking into a cement mixer lined with metal shards, that mouth big enough to swallow him whole. Marlowe felt metal in his fist. He knew he still held the knife. He thrust it forward, holding it upright. The demon was mid-leap, and it seemed to know the blade was there, its body twisting to one side, another cry halfway up its throat. Uh-oh. Sorry, didn't make that cry. Just thought it might be funny. Another cry halfway up its throat. But even the spawn of hell had to obey gravity. It thumped down on top of Marlowe, the blade sinking into the soft, gristly flesh of its stomach. There was a sound like a wing being pulled off a roasted chicken. Then the creature exploded, like a bomb in a butcher's shop. The force of it slammed Marlowe's head against the floor and he sank into something black and cold. Hey, Marlowe! It could have been 1,000,000 years, or 5 seconds later, that the words dragged him up. He snatched in a crackling breath, barely any oxygen there. Pan was crouched over him, drenched in blood. It dripped from her onto him, as cold as lake water. The room was decorated with demon guts. Charlie was doubled over and spitting chunks from his mouth. Little warning next time, maybe, Pan said, shaking a chunk of something wet and black from her hair. Oh, sure, he said, no worries. Next time I'll send an email. Make sure everyone has time to grab an umbrella. He tried to get up, falling onto his backside. Then Charlie was there, grabbing his wrist and pulling him to his feet. The whole world seemed to be moving, and it took him a moment to understand he wasn't imagining it. There was a pulse of sound running through the space, everything shaking for a few seconds, then falling quiet, shaking, then quiet, over and over. It was a sound he'd heard before, the sound of the engine. Everyone alive? Said Herc, staggering up. He winced, clutching his side. Just about, said Pan. You? Body armour took the worst of it, he said. Couple of ribs broken maybe, but hell, I got plenty more where they came from. What is this place? Said Charlie, walking to the mirror they'd entered through. Truck and Jamie were still there, but now they were frozen solid, as still as a photograph. He tapped on the glass, and the sound boomed like a bass drum. Before anyone could answer, something thumped into the wall, on the other side of the room. Marlowe heard the fluttering of leathery wings, the snap of teeth. Something else was growling, the sound so low that Marlowe couldn't pinpoint it. He gripped the knife in a sweaty fist. We should go, said Herc, limping across the room towards the passageway that sat there, identical to the one on the other side of the mirror. Whatever was outside was busy tearing its way through to get to them. Another demon was screaming above them, plaster dust raining down as it tried to claw in through the ceiling. Herc was almost at the passageway when a shape appeared in it, a hulking mass of twisted flesh that was even bigger than the one they'd just killed. Its head scraped against the top of the door as it lumbered through, its eyeless face taking them all in. Marlowe retreated to Pan's side, Charlie joining them. Claire was pounding on the mirror with her tiny fists, trying to smash her way back to the real world. It might as well have been armoured plexiglass. Well, said Charlie, the pistol rattling in his hands, it was nice knowing you all. Apart from you, Herc, you can be a bit of a dick. Please, Pan said. The demon stalked into the room on 6 legs that might once have been human arms, big, hairy hands flexing at the ends of them. Its face was a nightmare of moving parts, jagged rows of teeth leading towards the black hole of its throat. Somehow, I don't think please is going to cut it, said Marlowe. Please, Meridiana, Pan said, louder now. The wall coughed splinters as another demonic face pressed through. We need you. We need help. Nothing. Just the throbbing snarls of the demons. The big one in the passageway hissed at the one in the wall, feigning an attack, like a hyena squabbling for food. A chunk of timber crashed from the ceiling as the third demon tunnelled its way down. The knife in Marlowe's hand felt like a cocktail stick. Herc took the gun from Charlie and checked the mag. Please, Pan said again. We knew Maman. We knew your brother. We're here to fight Ostine, but we can't do it by ourselves. We can't. The big demon started to run, the floor trembling with the force of it. If Meridiana was anywhere here, then she didn't care about them. And why would she? She was safe here. She was hidden. And she'd lost everyone now. We know how to save him! The words were out of Marlowe's mouth before he even knew it, before he even understood them. We know how to bring Maman back. We can bring him back to you. The room shuddered. A subsonic noise that made Marlowe's bones shake. The demon stopped in its tracks, looking back like a dog that's heard a whistle. It snarled, then turned, bounding out of the room. The one in the wall disappeared just as fast, a sickly light pouring in through the hole it had made. The noise from the ceiling stopped, hooves drumming across the roof like thunder before fading. Pan threw a look at Marlowe. 1 part nice move to 3 parts what the hell do we do now? She knew better than to say it out loud, though. Instead, she ran across the room to the passageway. Marlowe followed, gagging on the rotting flesh stench the demons had left behind. They walked into the front room of the shop. No mirrors in this version, just the same door, wide open. Marlowe hesitated. He felt like he was on a carnival ride. One of the haunted house ones where you ride a cart through dark rooms, where people jump out at you and animatronics howl with recorded laughter. There was always some fresh horror around the corner, but you could never turn back. You could never retrace your footsteps. You could only let yourself be ratcheted forward and hope that the next scare, whatever it was, didn't make you crap your shorts. Or in this case, gut you, eat you, then crap you out into its shorts. Nobody wanted to walk through the door, and in the end it was Claire who bit the bullet. I just wanted it to be over. I just wanted to be over, she said, sniffing as she went, still rubbing her stomach like she was about to be sick. Marlowe wanted to be a gentleman, wanted to stop her so that he could check it was safe, but the mechanisms inside him had jammed. They started moving again only when she'd turned around and looked back through the door. There is nothing here, she said, scratching her wrist. No monsters. Herc limped after her, then Pan. Marlowe let Charlie go in front of him before stepping through. There was no Venetian street here, no cobbled road and chocolate box houses. They were in a vaulted brick cellar, the walls slick with algae, puddles of water pooling around the fat columns that held up the ceiling. Candles were mounted on the walls, fluttering in a non-existent wind. The shop they'd come out of sat alone in the huge space, slumped into itself like the last dude at a party. There were archways in all 4 walls, each leading into darkness. Eeny meeny, said Charlie. Something growled from the arch behind them, a demon padding into sight. It put its head down, ready to charge, but another deep, almost imperceptible blast of sound brought it to heel. It thrashed in protest, snarling at them. Another demon appeared from the archway to the right, smaller but with that same nightmare face. It staggered on 3 legs, its fourth just a ragged stump protruding from its shoulder. They're herding us, said Herc. They're herding us, said Herc, as the first demon lumbered closer, baring its teeth. And he was right, the demons pushing them towards the archway on their left. Miney mo it is, said Charlie. He walked towards the arch, his sneakers scuffing on the uneven floor. Marlowe followed. They all did. It wasn't like they had any say in the matter. More demons were swarming from the archways like rats, fighting among one another. The weird call that seemed to vibrate in the air was the only thing holding them back. The archway led into a corridor, as cold and damp as a sewer. Luckily it was short, ending with another arch up ahead. Through it seeped more firelight and that same pulse which seemed to resonate in Marlowe's soul. It had to be the engine up there. Nothing else could make that sound, could it? It can't have brought us back to the nest, said Pan. No way. I hope not, said Charlie. If we're back at the engine, then Ostheim will be here too. Claire shuddered, backing up against the wall. In all my time in the nest, I never saw a tunnel like this, said Herc. Not to mention a shop standing in the middle of it. Nah, this is someplace new. Behind them, the demons pressed closer, spittle spraying from their open jaws. Meridiana might have had some control over them, but even the best trained dog in the world cut loose when it smelled a free meal. Well, said Marlowe, one way to find out. He stepped through the arch. The next chapter is called Meridiana. It was an engine. This chapter is pretty gross from what I remember. It was an engine, but not one made of springs and cogs, not one made from nuts and bolts and iron and steel, not one made from anything mechanical at all. It was an engine made of flesh. It filled a cavern easily as big as the one beneath the pigeon's nest, looking less like the surface of an ocean and more like a coral reef. Pieces of skin and bone and muscle and hair spawned from every crevice in the rock, covering hundreds of stalagmites and stalactites. They glistened in the guttering torchlight, and Pan saw the pump of blood through veins, the slick throb of exposed organs. There were faces too, she saw. No, not faces. One face, repeated 1,000 times. 1,000,000, maybe. A woman's face, old enough for wrinkles, but at the same time strangely youthful, like a kid made up to look like an old woman. She had high cheekbones, sharp enough to chisel rock, a thin nose. Her hair hung in lank white blonde streaks, moist bald patches peeking out between them. Her eyes were white marbles flecked with oxblood twists, and they flicked fast from side to side in their sockets, like they were trying to escape. The sound of it, of 1,000,000 wet eyes sliding back and forth, was like heavy rain. The same face, everywhere she looked. And they all twisted around to look right back. "Mammon!" they said together. Individually they were whispers, but collectively it was a hurricane roar. Pan slapped her hands to her head before her eardrums burst, waiting for it to fade away. Even then the sound rolled around the cavern, echoing into infinity. "Meridiana," she said. It was, and yet it couldn't be. Each head was connected to a body that had been unravelled and unspooled. Blood vessels hung in the air like crimson cobwebs. Nerves had tunnelled into the stone. Bones had been fragmented into minuscule parts that clicked and whirred like clockwork. Each of the cadavers was intertwined with those around it, so that it was impossible to see where one ended and the next began. "Come to me," said the faces, another shockwave of sound that she could feel against her skin. It stank of death and decay, of things long buried. The demons had entered the cavern behind them, whining like nervous dogs. They snapped at their heels, driving them on. There was no path here that Pan could see, so she hopscotched from one patch of exposed skin to the next, trying to avoid the tender flesh and nerve clusters and brain in between. The heads all watched her go, pink tongues poking from those bloodless lips, white eyes blinking. The ground rose ahead, as high as a desert dune. Pan struggled up it, grabbing hold of bone and hair to haul herself towards the top. If the Meridiana engine minded, it showed no sign of it. It was only when Pan slipped and planted her foot into a pulsing mess of organs that the cavern came to life again, every single head snatching in a pained breath. "Sorry," Pan said. The horror was a nest of squirming things inside her, so unreal that all she wanted to do was howl with laughter. She bit back the urge, knowing that if she lost it now, then she would never leave this palace of flesh. She would lie here until the engine grew over her like so much ivy. Struggling for breath, she crested the dune. The cavern stretched as far as she could see, but directly beneath her was an island in the madness. It held a pool of dark water, and next to it a wooden cabin that belonged inside a fairy tale. "Oh, God," said Marlowe as he hauled himself onto the top of the living dune. "Oh, God, this is—" He couldn't finish. He just pumped a shot of his inhaler into his mouth. He was covered in old, sticky blood, scraps of skin. Pan glanced down at herself and saw that she was the same. Strands of yellow hair had wrapped themselves around her fingers, and her skin squirmed as she tried to brush them loose on her pants. The faces around her seemed to find it amusing, a laugh rippling from one end of the cavern to the next. The closest heads had to crane themselves up to look at her, and she had the urge to kick one like a ball, see how far it went. Once again, that tide of insane panic boiled up inside her. She had to close her eyes and count to 5 before finding herself again. Descending the other side of the dune was just as hard. Gravity tugging at her, trying to make her miss her step. Halfway down, her boot sank into her rib cage, the bones grinding against her like she was a wrench caught inside a motor. When she pulled free, she heard the mechanical flesh choke into life again, whirring like gears. "Careful," came that thunderous whisper again. "We work hard. We do not want to break." Pan took her time, hearing Marlowe, Charlie, Herc and Claire all curse as they followed her down into the valley. The closer she got, the more she saw. The shack wasn't made of wood at all. It had walls of bone and a roof of skin stretched taut. The pool, too, wasn't made of water, but of blood. A wide stone bay surrounded the liquid with a channel cut into it that was stained rust red. It still looked like something from a fairy tale, but one of the old ones, one of the ones they used to scare kids. And like so many of those, this story had a witch. She had the same face as all the others, but her body hadn't been cut open and laid out for all to see. She stood beside the pool, stooped and shaking, a filthy rag draped over her shoulders. Her skin was pink, bright pink, like she'd spent her life wading inside a vat of grape juice. Her hair, too, was crimson and clotted. Pan skittered down past the last few cadavers. She didn't think she'd ever been so relieved to touch solid ground. Marlowe thumped into her back, apologising as he tried to brush the residue of the not quite dead from his clothes. Charlie and Herc clattered down after him like train cars, followed by Claire. The old woman was 30 yards away and she paid them no attention. She was moving erratically, sweeping from side to side across the stone, her hands held out. She was waltzing. That's what she was doing, Pan realised. She was dancing with an invisible partner, up to the edge of the pool, and there she dunked a toe, a bare toe in the thick water. A peal of noise shuddered across the cavern as all of the old women's heads sighed. Pan swallowed, her throat like sandpaper. Hello, she said, the quiet words falling at her feet. The woman didn't hear them. She was holding a knife in her hand, Pan saw, a sliver of silver that flashed as she moved. Meridiana bowed, then glided back across the stone bay. There was a second woman there, Pan saw. Another Meridiana, identical in every way except this one was naked. Her wrinkled flesh hung around her like loose cloth, her eyes watching her double as she pirouetted gracefully. "I fell asleep," said Marlowe, "right? I dozed off somewhere back there because this is like a pure nightmare." And if it hadn't been before, it was now. The dancing Meridiana swept forward like a kingfisher diving for a fish, her blade a silver beak. It sank into the neck of her doppelganger without the slightest sound, a spurt of ruby-coloured blood sluicing outwards. It gushed down the channel, then flowed into the pool, sending out a web of ripples. "We must keep it full," the words came from Meridiana, and all her heads. "Oh my God," said Pan. Meridiana held her twin until she stopped twitching, then she laid her gently onto the floor. She flicked the knife, running it over her rags and examining the blade. Those myriad faces inside the engine all snatched in a breath, then spoke together. "We lose one, we gain one, we keep it full." Only when the echo of their voices stopped booming across the cavern did Pan step forward. The word didn't want to come up her throat, clinging to her insides like a stubborn child, but she coughed it up. "Meridiana?" The woman looked over her shoulder, right at her. Every head did the same, and Pan could feel the force of their stares as a physical pressure. Meridiana's body trembled, but that knife was rock steady, and it looked sharp enough to cut the universe in two. Pan stepped forward, her hands held high. "We need your help. Maman needs your help." She glanced at Marlowe, and he shrugged, nodding for her to keep going. "He sent us here. He told us."
"Mammon," the million faces said as one. "He is lost to us. The traitorous one took him. He took all of them. Just us left. Just us. From one. Yes."
It didn't make much sense, but Pan nodded, walking steadily across the stone floor of the cavern. Meridiana was 15 yards away now, close enough for Pan to see that her skin was so thin it was almost translucent. She looked like she could have been 1,000 years old. More laughter, grinding like an earthquake.
"Older than that, child. We are older than that. Time forgets us here. 100,000 years of hiding and time could not find us."
She ducked down, using the blade to open up the corpse of her double. For a few seconds she tugged and hacked at the body, seeming to lose herself in it. Then she looked up, her rheumy eyes blinking at Pan as though she'd forgotten who she was. She sniffed at the air, and her heads did too.
"We smell him on you, child. Our brother. We smell his blood. Where is he?"
"Ostheim killed him," Marlowe blurted out from her side. The heads opened their mouths and wailed, a wall of sound that crushed Pan, that might have broken her. It was Meridiana, though, who slapped her hands to her ears, almost stabbing herself with the knife.
"Do not speak his name. Do not speak any of his names, not even that one."
The moaning went on until Pan thought she couldn't bear it any longer, that it would end her. Then it ebbed gently into silence. Meridiana worked at the corpse again, drawing out a long, sticky strand of something red. "What the hell is she doing?" Charlie asked.
"We are building," came the reply. "We ran from him all the lifetimes of the world ago. We ran here and time forgot us. We had no engine, we had nothing, so we built one of our own. We built one from all of us."
Pan looked at the wall of flesh that grew around them. How many moving parts here? There had to be billions, fueled by the channels of blood that ran through it. This thing was not made of metal, but there was no denying it was an engine. Just staring at it, she could feel the cry of whoever lay there, behind the countless Meridianas, behind the gears and cogs and still beating hearts. She could hear that awful cry of the devil.
"We did not know where to start, but we began with ourselves. Each body is an engine that holds its soul, and does not that make it the most powerful machine in the universe? 7 billion atoms, 60 elements, organics and inorganics. There is a world inside us. There is the power of the stars inside us. Everything you could ever ask for. We only needed to harvest it."
With a single stroke, she cut open the skin of the corpse's chest, rummaging inside with blood-slicked fingers.
"There are 1,879,419 of us here, child. And this is just the beginning. We have lived here for 100,000 years in our pocket of broken time. We will live for 100,000 more."
"No," said Claire, "it cannot be." Pan glanced at her, the girl still clutching her stomach like she'd been stabbed. Then she turned back to Meridiana. "But how?" Pan said. "How did you know how to do it?"
"Because the engine is inside me, child. My brothers and I, even him. We were born to it. It lived inside our blood. We were its guardians. We kept it safe. Our circle was a thing of beauty, a thing of kindness. We were just children, younger than you, and there is no force more formidable than a child."
"Yeah, there is," muttered Marlowe. "Try a pissed-off spider-snake dude with a comb over."
"He was one of us, once, one of the 5, but he let the engine corrupt him. He let it fill him with darkness. He tried to take it, but when no one entity could ever possess a thing so powerful as the engine. We fought him, and time ruptured. The engine split itself in two in order to protect itself. The same infernal machine, but existing inside 2 separate times."
"But Time can't do that, said Marlowe. It's impossible.
Impossible to comprehend, perhaps, but not impossible. Impossible is a human word. It means nothing to us. It means nothing to the engine. Time and space are what we make of them. The universes are ours to mold.
Meridiana grabbed hold of something and wrenched hard, a pistol crack echoing across the water as a rib snapped free. Universes, Pan said. She felt as if she was sinking into a dark lake, like the truth was drowning her.
Did you think there was only one?
Meridiana laughed again. All of them laughed.
Child, you should know better. The first of us believed we were the only living souls. The first of you believed that their tiny pocket of civilization was all there was. How long ago was it that we were certain this planet was the center of everything, and that the sun and the stars revolved around us? Not long, child. Not long. There are many universes, many planes of reality, each identical but each unique, and each connected to its brothers. Where else would the engine have thought of the idea of splitting itself in two? The universe has duplicated itself many times, again and again, in order that it might repair itself if something should happen.
Something like what? Said Pan.
Something like him! Every universe has its dark side. Every universe spawns something bad. It is the very nature of existence that sooner or later the rot sets in. The things that should not be, the things that seek to eat worlds and devour souls, the very worst of them, you will always find them, child.
I don't understand, said Pan, the understatement of the century. All of it. All of this, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, said Herc from behind her. Pan glanced at him, and he too might have been the living dead. Beside him stood Charlie, rubbing his eyes as if he'd just woken up. Then Claire, the girl wearing a 1,000-yard stare that looked as if it would never leave her. None of it makes sense, Herc continued. None of it needs to. All we need to know is how we kill him. How do we kill that freaking...
He cannot be killed,
said Meridiana, cutting him off.
He is too old and too powerful. Now he has full control of the engine, the whole engine, reunited, and he will use it. The engine was only ever built for one purpose.
To open the gates of hell, said Marlowe. There was a sound like applause as all of the faces shook from side to side.
It is true that the engine can open a path through the void. It can connect all of the universes the way the stitches of a book connect all of its pages. But this was not its purpose. The engine was designed to be a prison. It was designed to keep the very worst of them at bay.
The very worst of who? Said Pam. It's the devil. Right. The devil, Marlowe added, taking another shot of his inhaler.
Just another meaningless human word,
Meridiana replied.
These evils are worse than any name you could conjure for them. They are furies that devour worlds. They are strangers who make a mockery of a man's mind and body. They are gods, old and terrible. The engine is the door that keeps them quiet, and that keeps them still.
And what happens when he opens it? Pan asked.
It ends!
Those two words hit her like a double tap to the chest from a 45. The loudest sound in the world. But you're about to tell us how we can stop it, said Herc, because my mom wouldn't have sent us here if you didn't have something.
We have this,
Meridiana said, gesturing with the blade at the landscape of life-turned machine.
In our 100,000 years alone, we built this.
Wait, how can it have been so long? Said Charlie. I thought it was only 100 years since you disappeared.
We hid from time. We hid and we built.
Pan remembered the way Truck and Jamie had frozen on the other side of the mirror, as if time had no hold here.
Our engine is not perfect. We have only just begun, but it works.
We can use it to make a contract, said Marlowe.
Only some, and it is not stable. I cannot guarantee that your contract will hold up. It can give you powers, though. This engine is testament to that. We use it to clone ourselves, to keep building.
Why don't the demons come for you? Pan asked. And again the heads laughed together.
The demons of which you speak, they are human souls twisted beyond recognition. Our father was the architect of this machine. We are its children. Those creatures serve us.
Right, said Pan, breathing out a long, slow breath. She clutched her head hard. It felt like the only way to stop it splitting open, to stop her brains from slopping out. So we can throw ourselves in that puddle of blood, hope that we don't drown, hope that this crazy old woman's machine works, and we can somehow make a contract. Then we go and find him, and hope that whatever powers we have are enough to kick his fat ass before coming back here and hoping that this nutjob can crack our contracts before we get dragged to hell. And the thought of it was prison dark, a metal cage around her soul. It just seemed so much and so impossible. How had she gotten here? A girl from Queens who'd once dreamed of owning a cake shop in the city, of an apartment in Brooklyn and a cat. How many wrong turns had she made for her to be walking into hell like this, on her own 2 feet? Oh, we sit it out here for 100,000 years, said Marlowe, chewing his blood-caked knuckles. Bet she doesn't even have an Xbox. Call them choices, muttered Herc with a weary smile. He clapped a big hand on her shoulder, drawing her close. I'm sorry, Pan, he said softly. I really am. I never should have come to you. What? She said, resting her head on his shoulder for a moment, and left the world saving to Marlowe and Charlie. Yeah, right. She stood straight, and when the world stopped spinning, she nodded. Okay, she said. Tell us what we have to do. She was answered not by Meridiana, but by a retching sound behind her. She looked to see Claire there, doubled over and holding her stomach. She was sobbing, bile dribbling from her lips. I'm sorry, Claire said. No big deal, kiddo, said Herc. Don't blame yourself for chucking your guts up in a place like this. No, she said. I'm sorry. She puked hard, her whole body convulsing with the force of it. Something fat and black dropped from her lips, wriggling like a giant slug. And suddenly the cavern was a hurricane of noise, every face screaming. Meridiana pointed a finger at Claire, her withered face a Halloween mask of terror. She pointed and she screamed.
You brought him here!
I did not have a choice, said Claire, staggering back, her words almost lost in the storm. He made me! He made me! Ostime, said Pan. And the black slug thing exploded. Probably shouldn't be doing Meridiana's voice like that. The things I do for you guys. Okay. That's like back when I did the Warden's voice for the Furnace series. I almost completely destroyed my voice. Okay, next chapter, I'll probably end on this one today, is called Knock Knock. Who's there? Knock knock, who's there? Boo. Boo-hoo. Why are you so sad? The world went from nightmare to chaos in a heartbeat, leaving Marlowe reeling. Whatever had just fallen from Claire's mouth was swelling fast, sprouting dozens of beetle-black limbs. They erupted from its flesh in every direction, pushing their way into the engine, into the eyes and mouths of the faces there, and erupting from the backs of heads.
You brought him here!
Meridiana and her faces howled.
You have ended us!
It made me! The French girl cried. It had to have happened back in the nest, Marlowe realised, when they'd left her upstairs. Claire stumbled, backing away on all fours like a crab. She wasn't quick enough, though, those obsidian tendrils worming over her, covering her. No, you promised me, you promised you'd... Then she was gone. Move! Yelled Herc, driving them across the stone towards the pool of blood. Meridiana opened her mouth and howled, a cry so deep that it was almost subsonic. It was answered by a distant scream, then another one. 2 demons appeared on the crest of the hill, pausing for a second, then bounding down it. More followed, an avalanche of twisted forms glistening in the torchlight.
"Destroy him!"
Meridiana ordered. The slug thing was now car-sized, its sides bulging. Thick black cords stretched from it like rancid intestines, pouring poison into the engine. Even as Marlowe watched, the organic mechanisms began to darken, the faces closest to the pool withering and shrinking, falling still. Snarling, the first of the demons pounced. The slug thing saw the attack coming, pushing out a razor-tipped spike that skewered the beast in mid-air. It screamed, thrashing. The next was luckier, thumping into the side of the abomination and sinking its teeth into the oil-slick flesh. The side of the slug burst like a worm bag, black, steaming water pouring out of it. But it was still growing, as big as a van now, bloated and awful. It sounded like whole universes were screaming. Meridiana was on the move too, running across the bay. Marlowe held up his hands in defence, waiting for the attack, waiting for that silver blade to puncture his skin. She loomed over him, maybe 8 feet tall. She was so close that this time, when she spoke, Marlowe could hear her voice above its earth-shaking chorus.
"You must be quick," she said. "Use our engine before it's destroyed."
Jump into that lake of oily blood. It didn't seem like the best idea in the world. Marlowe looked back to where the slug thing seethed with demons, dozens of them writhing on its back and sides, opening wounds in its skin. Spikes sliced upwards from it, piercing the demons, holding them upright as they shivered and fell still. It was like a forest of staked, flayed men. Maybe the pool wasn't so bad after all. "What do we trade for?" said Pan. There's nothing that can beat that."
"You cannot overpower him," she said, "but you can outsmart him. Trade for the knowledge of how to pass in between."
"What?" said Marlowe. The noise behind him was like a raging battle between 2 armies. The slug thing was now 30 feet tall and just as wide, a bloated, cancerous mass whose tendrils pushed out into the engine. Everything around it was greying, dying. Only a handful of demons were still alive to fight, and when they were gone, Pan knew, it would come for them.
"Trade for the vision," Meridiana said. "Trade for the ability to step out of time, to step behind and between the physics of the universe. It will let you open up a pocket of time. Just go. It is our blood. It will show you what to do."
"Time travel," said Marlowe, thinking back to his first time in the engine. "But that contract can't be broken. It's impossible."
"That word again," said Meridiana. "So human. So meaningless. Go, child. Go now. But only one, or you will both die."
She whirled around, her rags fluttering as she charged towards the beast. Meridiana called out again, the engine seeming to come to life, those countless heads tugging pathetically at the stone they were fixed to, like they meant to roll to her aid. "Did you get any of that?" Marlowe said, turning to the pool. The surface of the water was pocked with ripples, as if there was something alive in there. This body of liquid, like the one in the engine, gave off absolutely no reflection. Leaning over it, he couldn't see an inch of what lay below. No," said Pan. "Did you?" Marlowe shook his head, looking at her, then at Herc and Charlie. Behind them the slug was building-sized, devouring the engine like a white blood cell consuming a virus. Its bloated form was spilling out across the stone, maybe 40 feet away, and gaining fast. It had no face of any kind, but Marlowe could sense Ostheim there. The rancid, acidic stench of him clawed its way into his sinuses. It was either that or the pool. "Talk about being caught between a giant world-ending slug and a hard place," he said. "Who's going?" Herc yelled. "Me," said Pan without hesitation. "Hang on," said Marlowe, but Pan was already stepping over the edge. He grabbed her arm, trying to wrestle her back. Gravity already had her, pulling her in. He let go, arms wheeling. But it was too late. "Oh, no!" And for the second time in his life, he found himself falling into a pool of pure evil. He hit it without sound or feeling, as if the liquid had yawned open beneath him. There was just silence and darkness. Then suddenly the sensation of thick, warm blood against his face. He held his breath for as long as he could, but he breathed out just before he fell, and his lungs were empty. They screamed inside him, feeling like they were attempting to crack open his chest. And when he could bear it no more, he opened his mouth and took a breath. The coppery roar of blood filled him, choking him, and it was as if Meridiana had ridden the wave into his soul. He saw her, just a child, her and her brothers, 5 of them, playing inside the heart of the engine as if it was a jungle gym. He saw through the engine too, to a world of darkness, a world where they lived. She'd been right. These weren't monsters. They were gods, long forgotten and full of fury. Marlowe could feel the horror of them, and it promised to wring every last drop of goodness from his soul. He saw a man inside a storm, a beast who seemed to inhale whole cities through the tornado of his mouth. He saw a man inside what looked like an orchard, whose face was a shifting illusion of forms, whose blood turned children into monsters. Escape from furnace. There were so many of them, countless unspeakable things, but it towered above them all, the creature he had already seen in the engine, that mountain of madness that watched through the countless clustered rot holes of its face. He closed his eyes, but still he saw it, as if the sheer brute force of it had burned through his eyelids. He panicked, the blood gushing down his throat, as solid inside his windpipe as an iron bar.
"What is it you desire?"
the creature said, a voice that resonated inside his skull. Visions flashed before him, visions of the world drowning in blood and fire, demons stalking the streets, visions of Pan and Charlie and his mum screaming to him as they rotted away. Then, when it was too much, when it felt like he could scream himself into oblivion, they vanished, as quickly and absolutely as if somebody had flicked a switch. He stood on Staten Island, on the waterfront. The old neighbourhood was an oasis of calm, just the sputter of an accelerating car, a distant honk, the ceaseless chatter from the birds, and the lull of the water. Across the bay lay Manhattan, sparkling in the sun. The ferry was pulling away from the terminal, a chopper shadowing it. "You all right, man?" said Charlie beside him. Marlowe turned, gulping like a fish out of water. His friend smiled at him. "You zoned out for a minute there." "What?" Marlowe asked. "You went AWOL," Charlie said, kicking a stone into the grass. "Anyway, come on, let's head back. Got homework to do and PewDiePie to binge on. You stopping at mine?" Marlowe shook his head, feeling the wind in his hair, the sun on his skin. A gull wheeled overhead, crying out. It was all real. It was so real. If he just kept walking, then he'd get back to his house. He'd go in through the front door and his mum would wrap her skinny arms around him, would smother him with kisses. Donovan would try to wrestle them both to the floor, the old dog's tail thumping. All he had to do was wish it. All he had to do was ask. "No," he said. "No, no, no." "Please," said Charlie. A bead of blood leaked from his eye, winding down his cheek. More dropped from Charlie's nose, pattering on the asphalt. His face was wilting, the meat sliding off the bone. "Please, Marlowe, just take us home. Take us back." "No!" Marlowe's scream bubbled out of him and the scene erupted, fading into blood. Another shape floated where Charlie had stood, a dark outline growing closer. Then Pan was there, her face grim with determination as she churned through the pool. She reached for him, and they grabbed each other, sinking fast.
"What is it you desire?"
What had Meridiana said?
"No more than one, or you will both die."
It's a little too late to worry about that, so he focused on what she'd asked them to wish for, the ability to travel through time, to travel behind and between. It didn't make any sense, but he said it anyway, beaming the thought out towards the creature that sat there. He could see Pan doing the same, her lips working silently. "I want to travel through time. I want to travel in between. I want to travel through time. I want to travel in between." He said it again and again, pushing every other thought away.
"It is done," said the voice, "and the price is your soul."
He kicked upwards, Pan doing the same. It was too far. He wouldn't make it. He wouldn't. He exploded from the surface of the pool, clawing in a shrieking breath. Pan was there next to him, and they hugged desperately, pulling each other beneath the surface again. Marlowe reached, found the lip of the pool. He spat out a mouthful of hot, salty blood. Somebody grabbed his arm, but he couldn't see who through the mucus over his eyes. Everything blood red and blurry. The noise inside the cavern was unbelievable, a million-strong orchestra of screams. "Come on," said Herc, hauling him up. "We gotta go." Marlowe wiped his face on his hands until the world came into focus. No time had passed while they were in the pool. Meridiana still charging into battle, the slug thing ballooning ever outward. Herc heaved Pan up, and she vomited a stomach full of blood all over him. "You're alive then," Herc said, matter-of-factly. And Marlowe was surprised too, because Meridiana had told them the pool would hold only one. Herc threw Pan's arm over his shoulders, guiding her around the edge of the pool. "We'll have to flank it," he roared. Marlowe staggered after them, Charlie at his side. He kept looking back, expecting to see the freak twist its behemoth body around, to flop and roll after them. But whatever this thing was, it was mindless. It was a weapon, programmed to destroy Meridiana's creation. She hurled herself at it, her glinting blade unleashing a torrent of black fluid. Then Marlowe tripped and turned to face front, using everything he had left to put one foot in front of the other. Only when the slug thing was 100 feet behind them did they cut to the side, scaling the dune of screaming faces. Marlowe scrambled upwards, not caring where he put his hands and feet, grabbing hold of strands of hair, of wet open jaws, of ribs and bones and ropey sinews. The faces simply screamed, capable of nothing more than watching as their creator fought. Marlowe closed his eyes, trying to find his new powers in the confusion. He reached out with his mind, grabbing hold of time, but nothing happened. "It's not working," he said, his lungs like bagpipes. He reached for his inhaler and took a shot, only to find another gout of blood on his tongue. The monster he'd known since childhood had its hands around his throat again, squeezing hard. Pan and Herc had reached the summit of the living dune, vanishing over the top. Charlie offered Marlowe a hand, hauling him up the last few feet. They ran down the other side together, hand in hand, tripping and slipping on the wet, roiling, screaming ground. The end of the cavern was a patch of darkness in the trembling reef, and they ran for it. Herc ushered Pan through, then turned, waving Marlowe and Charlie on. Marlowe careened through the gap, skidding to a halt and looking back. The slug thing was so big now that it could be seen over the top of the hill, those black tendrils flailing. Whatever Meridiana was doing, it wasn't working. If it carried on growing like that, then it would soon fill the entire cavern. He felt a hand on his shoulder. Pam was there, drenched in clotted blood. "You feel anything?" she asked. He shook his head. "Maybe it didn't work," he said. "I mean, she was crazy." "It worked for her," said Pan. "She cloned herself 1,000,000 times. I'm definitely under contract. I feel like crap." So did he, now that she'd mentioned it. The same deep, sapping ache of the engine. All he wanted to do was sleep. Not with that thing still growing behind him, though. Herc was on the move again, leading them up the short passageway and back into the vaulted room. The lonely shop sat where they'd left it, its red door still open. They sloshed through puddles and stopped outside. A booming cry rolled through from the cavern, loud enough to shake dust from the ceiling. "The mirrors, right?" said Charlie. "That has to be what she was talking about, stepping through mirrors. I mean, it brought us here." It made sense. Marlowe followed Herc inside, the walls doing nothing to mute the noise from the cavern. They passed through the empty front room into the back. The sole mirror still stood there, Truck and Jamie frozen inside it. Pam put her fingers to the glass. Nothing. She thumped her fist against it, shunting the frame back a couple of inches. Still nothing. Screaming in frustration, she kicked out at the mirror and it toppled, hitting the floor with a thud. "Hey, cool your heels," said... "Hey, cool your heels," said Herc. "It should work," she shouted back. "I don't get it." A tear wound its way through the blood on her face, her body shaking like she was holding in an explosion. When Marlowe walked towards her, though, she fired him a look that was more terrifying than the slug thing in the next room. He held up his hands in surrender. "If it's not the mirror, then what?" he said. There was nothing else in the room, nothing else in the building. The hopelessness crept into his marrow, building in his chest. If they didn't find the answer soon, then he was going to lose it again, like back in the stairwell in Paris. He was going to start tearing through the walls and the floor. He chewed on a knuckle, the pain helping him focus. "There were more archways in the room outside," said Herc. "There were more archways in the room outside," said Herc. "3 of them. There has to be a way out there." Why wouldn't she just tell us, Pan said. Stupid crazy bitch, why didn't she just tell us how to do it? She doubled back, retreating out of the building. Herc thumped into the door in his haste, and it slammed into the wall, rebounding and swinging shut. Marlowe grabbed it before it could close properly, and felt a rush of grief pass through him, the sensation of stepping out of the sun and into the cold, damp shade of a mausoleum. When he let go of the door, the feeling passed, and he'd taken a few more steps out into the vaulted cellar before it struck him. He looked back. The shop had a red door. Faded, yes, the handle green with verdigris, but it was definitely red. Hey guys, wait up! Marlowe took hold of it again, ignoring the bad vibes that ebbed from it. He swung it to and fro, not the slightest noise coming from those old hinges. The door was heavier than it looked, and it seemed to move in his grip, pulling like a dog on its leash. Holy crap, said Pan. That's a red door. An old one, said Urk. Think it still works? I think it will now, said Marlowe, flexing his fingers. I think this is exactly what Meridiana meant by stepping in between. Because that's what the red doors did, wasn't it? They were tunnels through space and time. But only if you had the power to use them. Marlowe pulled the door shut, and it closed with the sound of a muffled explosion. Pan had walked to his side, and she reached out, placing her fingers against the peeling wood. Knock, knock, she said. Marlowe grabbed the handle and closed his eyes. He thought about the red door that led into the nest. He thought about the corridor, the elevator. He could see it in his mind's eye, like he was standing right there. Pan pressed her shoulder against his, and he could feel the heat of her, feel her fast, shallow breaths. Who's there? He said. He turned the handle and opened the door. Uh-oh. So, we have only got... It's literally like 18 pages left, actually. But I won't do it now because we'll save those 3 chapters for... Yeah, we'll save those 3 chapters for next time. Because what we're at... Yeah, we're up to an hour. I hope you enjoyed that. And yeah, it's getting quite cool now. We're coming up towards the end, and after that we will read Hell Walkers, hopefully, and find out what happens there as well in the last book in the series. So, I hope you have a wonderful day, whatever you're doing, and I hope the sun is shining for you, even though we're well into October now. And I hope that somewhere today you have a really awesome, pleasant surprise that makes you smile. Yeah, I love you guys. Have a brilliant day, and I will see you very soon for the final part of The Devil's Engine, Hell Fighters. Not Hell Farters. That was going to be the 4th book in the season, but no one wanted it. All right, see you later. Bye.